In From Hell, Alan Moore says, "The one place gods inarguably exist is in our minds, where they are real beyond refute, in all their grandeur and monstrosity. To some extent, this may also be applicable to fictional characters. Before temples and statues, gods and characters influenced the world with thoughts shared through words, writings, and pictures, some of which managed to reach a critical mass of persistence in many people's minds to the point of escalating into even greater action and works in the material world. Not having grown in a polytheistic culture, it wouldn't be right to directly equate fictional characters with gods which have shared cultures around them. But it's worth noting that the advantage of millennia of shared stories and cultural artifacts does make one wonder about the potentially humble beginnings of ancient pantheons, and how the popular characters of our current age may affect the world should they persist for centuries and millennia in the cultural landscape. The last century or so has been pretty fertile in the development and spreading of fictional characters, and several of these have been assisted by aggressive marketing efforts and collaborations between different mediums. Yet sometimes some characters manage to ascend into public awareness, or at least far beyond expectations, despite very minor beginnings from which not much would be expected. This is the story of Goeniko. The 90s were a decade particularly fertile in fighting games, a genre which is particularly centered on its characters. This is often attributed to Capcom's Street Fighter II, although several experiments in the genre preceded it, including the rarely discussed original Street Fighter. Curiously, much of the competition to Capcom's efforts in the genre following Street Fighter II would be driven by the driving force behind the original Street Fighter, Takashi Nishiyama, who moved to SNK and drove development of that company's fighting games. SNK's fighters often experimented with mechanics and storytelling across different series like Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, and a later King of Fighters, while Capcom would also branch out with games like Darkstalkers and Cyberbots. Each company's innovation keeping the other on their toes and helping to advance the genre as a whole. Eventually, they would informally acknowledge each other through parody. When they acknowledged each other formally, they agreed to develop a series of crossover games. Collaboration started in SNK's Neo Geo Pocket Color. First with SNK vs. Capcom Card Fighters Clash, which allowed the use of non-fighting game characters, as well as established relationships and relative power levels between characters from both companies. Then SNK vs. Capcom Match of the Millennium, an actual fighting game, which also serves as a love letter to the works of both companies. Curiously, it was developed by Dimps, which is run by Takashi Nishiyama himself, in a way bringing characters from both fighting game legacies back home. Year 2000, Capcom released Capcom vs. SNK Millennium Fight 2000, the first arcade title in this crossover series, which was also ported to consoles, and this was more successful. Primarily, it focused on characters from Street Fighter and the King of Fighters series, although it added one character from Darkstalkers and one from Samurai Showdown. Later, it would release Capcom vs. SNK 2, which became even more successful, broadened the scope of referenced games. After that came the second Card Fighters Clash game for the Neo Geo Pocket Color, SNK vs. Capcom Card Fighters 2 Expanded Edition, which expanded the cast, amount of cards and mechanics, and also acknowledged some characters from Capcom vs. SNK 2. 2003 got SNK vs. Capcom Chaos, which appeared to base some of its cast choices on Capcom's games by avoiding repetitions and using more characters from outside the fighting game genre. And finally, in 2006, SNK vs. Capcom Card Fighters DS, with almost entirely new mechanics, although it retained several characters from the originals. But SNK vs. Capcom is where the magic really happens here. It contains 24 characters which would be selected by default and 12 bosses and mid-bosses available. So it's 12 bosses and mid-bosses not available by default unless you use the code to play as them. For each character, there are 3 possible transformations that could be inflicted either by the real final bosses, with Athena transforming characters into animals and the Red Armor transforming them into monsters. But one of the mid-bosses, Dmitri, had a move called Midnight Bliss, which would transform the characters female. As Dmitri is one of the mid-boss characters, you could only see his transformations if you fought against him on the fourth fight of arcade mode, which was determined by how you did in the prior fights. If you met the hardest criteria, you'd fight non-fighting game characters, either Zero or Mars people. The intermediate criteria is where things start getting peculiar. You either fight Geese Howard, a classic SNK boss, or Dmitri, the protagonist of the Darkstalker series, who looks more threatening here than he does in Capcom's own games. At this point, things still make sense. Darkstalker's characters are supposed to be far beyond humanity in their abilities. But if you don't meet any criteria, you either fight Dan Hibiki or Goenitz. Dan makes sense here. He's a character that Capcom designed specifically to make fun of SNK while making him weak on purpose, though SNK has put him to interesting use when given the chance. Goenitz is the final boss of his debut game, The King of Fighters 96. He drives the plot of not only his debut game, but also the games that take place before and after it. He's a notoriously frustrating character to fight due to his ability to keep you away and by how brutal he can be up close. Now, Geese Howard is a regular character in the game, where Goenitz is the final boss. So why is Goenitz at the same level as Dan? SNK has comic relief characters they could have used, or they could have used Yuri, who they have used reference Capcom's fighters in the past. Goenitz, although he's been giving you animations, attacks, and dialogue for this game, has already been brought low by being put at the same level as Dan. Yet it seems in the grand scheme of things, this may have been a trade-off to make up for the fact that the secret SNK final boss is in heaven, and the secret Capcom boss is in hell. SPC is an interesting game, but it's not a subtle one. Or maybe on some level this was meant to help make Goenitz more visible. As mentioned before, Dmitri has an attack that transforms his victims, turning them female if they're male, and even if they're already female, often changing them in some way that's humorous, or references or reveals something about their character, before draining them physically. He is, after all, a vampire and one with a predilection for women. And if he can show off his power and inflict some humiliation along the way, that's a plus in his book. It's oddly fitting that someone with a true monstrous form chooses to present with a human look while wearing a tuxedo that shows off his muscles, a mix of classy and goofy which he backs with sheer power. It's oddly fitting for someone with a truly monstrous form who chooses to present with a human look while wearing a tuxedo that shows off his muscles, a mix of classy and goofy which he backs up with sheer power over the physical world. Anyway, the only way you see these transformations is if you use a code to select him, or if you fight him during arcade mode, or against an opponent who also used the code. So to see the transformations you can inflict on the game's 36 characters, you must use a code to access 12 of these characters. So some are more likely to be seen than others. So to see the transformations you can inflict on the game's 36 characters, you must use codes to access 12 of those characters. So some of them are more likely to be seen than others, and even then for only a couple of seconds. But that's where the internet comes to the rescue, as kind souls have compiled all of the possible transformations for everyone to see. If any of those were to stand out, its odds would be 1 to 36 in that particular context, much lower compared to already established characters who are actively promoted. Goenitz's female transformation, against all probability, stood out. There was a fair amount of fan art, the effort of which can be compared to drawing just about any other character for those with artistic inclinations. But then people went further. People started making Mugen versions of her. For those who don't know what Mugen is It's a 2D fighting game engine which allows you to program your own characters, although a popular use has been to rip sprites from existing fighting games and to adapt them to the engine, occasionally with original modifications or consolidating move lists from across different games. To adapt the female version of Goenitz to Mugen, it's theoretically possible to take a version of Goenitz someone has already implemented and to modify its sprites and collision boxes, since she's a bit shorter, and possibly create or adapt voice samples. This is beyond regularly drawn fan art, as it means adapting dozens of unique sprites up to the hundreds. This is based on the fact that there was only one sprite where the character is presented whole to use as a reference before Dimitri drains her. Given the nature of the one sprite and the fact that Goenitz has kick attacks, a decision had to be made regarding leg wear, considering her jacket covers her legs down to her boots. Between Goenitz's look and officially depicted look for a related character, Shermie, it was a valid case for both. Some people drew her with pants and some without. And in at least one case, went further and drew it in higher definition than the original Goenitz sprite. This variety is also reflected in the names given to the implementations of the character, like Goeniko, Schlüssel, Wind, and Rias. None of the other transformations inspire such a drive, so it seems pertinent to ask why, or to at least try and understand the phenomenon. It clearly seems related to the infamous Rule 63 that posits the creation of female versions for any character. That applies to every other character that Dimitri can use Midnight Bliss on since Vampire Savior, and none other has had as much of an impact. It may be useful to look at the timeline of inspirations and events. (1994) Darkstalkers, 1995 Neon Genesis Evangelion, 1996 The King of Fighters 96, 1997 Vampire Savior, 2003 SNK vs. Capcom SVC Chaos, 2006 The King of Fighters Pachinko, 2014 The King of Fighters 98 Ultimate Match Online, 2016 The King of Fighters 14, 2018 SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy, as well as some apocryphal fan works from 2008 and 2018. Google Trends also highlights a peak in interest in Japan by 2007, with some resurgence around the release of SNK Heroines in 2018. It seems pertinent to start with Dmitry Maximov's debut in Darkstalkers, because while he was the protagonist, and the original Japanese name of the game is Vampire the Night Warriors, he's the only vampire in the game. Yet his popularity was soon overshadowed by his female co-protagonist, Morrigan Ainsland, the succubus. In universe, one of his objectives is to conquer the throne of Makai from Morrigan, who inherited from her father, who beat and banished Dimitri from their kingdom. She doesn't even care about the role he's trying to get from her. So both in the game and outside it, he's losing to a female character and his claim as a protagonist and an important character in his own game. Is at stake. By the second game of the series, even the series starts to drift away from him, as new characters that use supernatural as new characters that use supernatural power to fight dark forces shift the Japanese title to Vampire Hunter. But by the third game, whose Japanese game again reshifts to a newer character with messianic ambitions. By the, by the third game, the Japanese title again reshifts to a newer character with messianic ambitions, Vampire Savior. But it was in this game that Dimitri earned the skill that would make him distinct yet valuable to the kind of fans that preferred Morrigan to him. While he was not a female character, with his new Midnight Bliss attack, he could now make female characters out of male ones and apply new aesthetic twists to the existing female characters. And of course, this new skill was used to belittle Morrigan. By itself, this new move appears to have raised Dimitri's presence in video game crossovers, as prior to that, Morrigan tended to be the default representative of their series. So in a way, he managed to sort of get even outside the game in a way that his game's story never quite enabled him to. While Morrigan made it to the early Capcom and SNK crossover fighting games, he got to take her place in SNK vs. Capcom, helping to distinguish its cast and introducing the Midnight Bliss transformations to a whole new set of characters. Now he could bring added value that she could not, as long as time and budget allowed Now he could bring added value that she could not, as long as time and budget allowed artists to implement transformations he's capable of. This applied to SVC Chaos, Capcom Fighting Jam, and Cross Edge. Before moving on to Goenitz, it also seems pertinent to address his origins, as he appears partially inspired by Gendo from Neon Genesis Evangelion. Aesthetically, their face and especially beard is somewhat similar, but they're both men on a mission draped in religious imagery with overwhelming influence over lives. They're both men on a mission draped in religious imagery with overwhelming influence in the lives of young blue-haired girls not known for their wide emotional range. Gendo's role in Evangelion consists of him taking control of a massive project meant to save humanity from alien forces for the sole purpose of reuniting with his deceased wife. And everyone else in his life is essentially treated as a tool to bring about that result. Goenitz's name is also apparently based on an antagonist from Space Battleship Yamato, who attempts to betray that show's main antagonist. Goenitz is part of a group setting out to eliminate humanity to protect the Earth, and he is by far the most dedicated of them, having started working on his plan at least a decade in advance, which even involved getting a detractor for the group killed by his own daughter. Another part of his preparations involved killing one of the heirs of one of the clans that opposes his group, taking the eye of a guy who tried to acquire his group's power and letting him use some of that power when he survived, yet making sure he was spied on by two members from his own group. Right before his debut game, he beat the heir of one of the clans that oppose him so hard that his fighting game style changed almost completely. His special abilities mainly revolve around the use of wind and are powerful enough to wreck a whole stadium, and he generally looks quite composed when he uses them. Curiously, his profile lists windsurfing as a hobby, which I'm not sure counts as training or cheating. His Jonokaze special move is particularly infamous, as it can be used at multiple distances, potentially making it frustrating to reach and attack him. And his Kokudeska line that is used in conjunction with it tends to trigger similar responses. His physical attacks, however, tend to have a more brutal look to them, and and although they're named differently, they have been compared to some. They have been compared by some to series anti-hero Yori Yagami. To which he has some more connections. In the official ending, he's ultimately defeated by the heirs of the clans. In the official ending, he is ultimately defeated by the heirs of the clans that oppose his group, and he dies, but not before ensuring that a couple of the detractors from his group are killed, and his efforts pave the way to his group to continue their efforts later on. That would be the end of his game career, but he would return as a secret character in SPC Chaos, where the special interaction between this priest and a vampire would generate the image of a nun that stuck with a lot of people and inspire several efforts since. Many of these efforts would come from fans, and this response would be acknowledged in a more official capacity, like a reference in a pachinko game, and the introduction of a character in a mobile game. The Japanese version acknowledged the female version of Goenitz, but actually named Goeniko as named by Japanese fans when the character was introduced to the English version. The issue remained that the character's existence was still originally bound to a transformation induced by a character from another company, but a canonical window of possibility eventually opened. The King of Fighters 14 would open the series to a wider multiverse of SNK's works, especially through a team composed entirely of characters from outside the King of Fighters continuity, and the game's ending opened that possibility space even further, while signaling that a few characters were aware of this. Now, characters that had been killed or based on other series seem to become viable introductions to the story. So not only could it be possible for Goenitz to return from the dead to the story, an alternate version of the character would not be out of the question. The King of Fighters 15 is yet to be released, but we didn't have to wait that long to see the possibility space of the series opening up. SNK Heroines was announced and released, declared to be an official continuity with the King of Fighters. SNK Heroines was announced and released, declared to be an official continuity with the King of Fighters series, despite some differences in gameplay, tone, and aesthetics, namely in that all of its playable characters were female. According to producer Yasuyuki Oda, the character roster for SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy was chosen based on 3 categories: popular characters we want to grow and make more popular, and lastly the special group, which was really just a way for us to sneak in Shermie. In another interview, they stated that the female version of classic SNK icon Terry Bogard was actually the very first thing that was decided about the game. Both of these statements are pertinent considering the possibility space they open. With Shermie, that character that's part of Goenitz's Orochi group is brought back from the dead, and she might not be the only one. With Terry, the gates are open for any character to be turned female in an SNK context, independently from the transformation mechanics introduced by a Capcom character. Although its superficial aesthetics would appeal to everyone, SNK Heroines is a special game in a few ways. It takes place entirely in a dream world powered by the imagination of one of the KOF 14 characters, Kukri, in a place not unlike the 2000 film The Cell. Kukri is so aware of the multiversal circumstances of the King of Fighters story that he was even aware of the return of a character who had removed himself from continuity through time paradox in the previous game. His plan in SNK Heroines is to hijack the dreams of other characters and harness their fear and despair to make his dream world manifest into reality, although at least one of them joins outside his influence. For a character but her character development that enables this is one of the special things that the game does. Among these hijack characters are not only characters from the KOF continuity, but also a few guests from other companies, which somewhat expands the possibility space of who can be subject to the phenomena the game allows. And one of the guest characters, Skullomania, is subject to a change in their physical sex. Now, Cookie wasn't treated as a major antagonist in the KOF game when he made his debut, but that established the tone for him between edgy and goofy, which is further emphasized in his newer game. In every location, SNK Heroines takes place in a mansion designed and decorated in his image to project the self-aggrandizing. And every location in SNK Heroines takes place in a mansion designed and decorated in his image to project self-aggrandizing sense of wealth and taste. The developers admitted to basing it off of Castlevania's Symphony of the Night. So basically, he's about as close to Dimitri the Vampire, the current SNK canon supports as far as King of Fighters series goes. And between that and the possibilities opened by the mercy of Shermie's revival and the severity of the changing Terry's body, SNK Heroine seems custom made to enable the introduction of Goeniko to canon. However, they never got around to implementing her, at least not yet, not in SNK Heroines. But at this point, we're yet to see any character reveals for King of Fighters 15. They do, however, have precedence in acknowledging some mimetic takes on their games. In KOF 12, released in 2009, KOF 12, released in 2009, acknowledged the mimetic video from 2007 about Jin Fuha from Might Fighting 3 commenting on his moves. And KOF 2013, released about a year later, featured an icon that referenced Ryo Sakazaki from the Art of Fighting series riding a bike. Also, sort of a few mimetic images and videos from around 2007, particularly inspired where the scene mentions the use of one of his moves against armed opponents, which would be questionable against firearms. In both these cases, works from fans brought the appeal of characters to SNK's attention, but their implementation reflected elements emphasized by the memes. Jin Fuha was depicted as a guest in sportscasts to comment on fights, not unlike how he commented on his and a few others' moves in his mimetic video. And Ryo was depicted riding his bike in a new art style, but the aspect of using his moves against firearms was left out. For the female version of Goenitz, there was plenty of art, and the efforts to make her playable in Mugen bring to mind Alan Moore's equating of art to magic, as they may have considerably helped to demonstrate enough interest in that version of the character to enable more officially sanctioned versions. In her favor is also the fact that should she replace the original male version of the character, the genders of the members of the Orochi group would be balanced. On the other hand, Goenitz's combat mechanics tend to be particularly frustrating to deal with, so if the fans of that version of the character are mostly into her aesthetics, would it be worth implementing her as a fully playable character in an official game? Even if the character has been fully implemented in Mugen multiple times, Mugen is still not particularly bound to concerns of competitive balance and player enjoyment when playing as a character or fighting it, especially when anyone can modify characters' programming there. Still, the fact that she's playable in at least one mobile game, the King of Fighters 98 Limited Match Online, if one with a completely different kind of gameplay, is at least a testament to her impact, as is the fact that she has at least one alternate outfit in that game. There's also the matter of the temperament and mission of the original Goenitz, which are particularly antagonistic and brutal. If the appeal of the female character is a relatively serene look, Would it be legitimate to change her personality and story role compared to the original version to match that? Compared to just about everyone else in this group, Goenitz appears to be the most dedicated to their collective mission, a true believer almost to the detriment of his appeal as a character, to the extent that he may have less of a life outside of that than his peers do. Maybe dropping his traits to emphasize her superficial appeal would risk reducing her to Maybe dropping his traits to emphasize her superficial appeal would risk reducing her to comparative harmlessness. Maybe SNK is still pondering if this female version that fans clung to can stand on her own. Maybe SNK is still pondering if this version. Maybe SNK is still pondering if this version. Maybe SNK is still pondering if this female version of the. Maybe SNK is still pondering if this female version that fared. Maybe SNK is still pondering if this female version that Maybe SNK is still pondering if this female version that fans clung to can stand on her own, enough that she would be worth giving her enough that she would be worth giving her enough that she would be worth giving her own separate history and personality. With so many characters in their history that they could be bringing back, they can afford to hold back on a decision on whether to treat her as a new character or to treat Goenitz as the caterpillar or cocoon to the Goeniko butterfly. In any case, I doubt they're unaware of her. After all, they did bring back Miss X from Portugal. They did bring back Miss X from Portugal. They did bring back Miss X from Portugal. After all, they did bring back Miss X from Portugal. They did bring back Miss X from Portugal. After all, they did bring back Miss X from Portugal. After all, they did bring back Miss X from a portable game from 2000, Gal's Fighters, which precedes SVC Chaos by 3 years by implementing her as DLC and SNK heroines in both female and male forms at that. In her favor are the facts that her gameplay, based on Yuri Yagami, one of their more popular characters, had already passed the test of time across multiple iterations. Additionally, what that depiction seemed to reveal about the character helped put into perspective Yuri's attitudes toward the rival kept threatening. Additionally, what that depiction seemed to reveal about the character helped to put into perspective Yuri's attitudes toward the rival he keeps threatening with death yet never gets round to kill. Even more so, Additionally, what that depiction seemed to reveal about the character helped to put into perspective Yuri's attitudes toward the rival he keeps threatening. Put into perspective Yuri's attitudes toward the rival he keeps threatening with death, yet never gets round to killing. Even more so than a canonical story, even when the Force Goenitz help. Even more so than a canonical story where. Even more so than a canonical story, even where the Force Goenitz helped to revive, induced a berserk state in him and commanded him to kill his rival, and that backfired spectacularly. Curiously, that berserk version of Yuri was also in SVC Chaos, and when struck by Dimitri's Midnight Bliss, got turned into Miss X, which seems like an interesting way to reveal his more pure and raw attitudes. And then in SNK Heroines, the nature of that attitude was made even more eloquent in Miss X's ending. So So it's interesting that both SVC Chaos and SNK Heroines help to highlight the more feminine side of a character with which Goenitz has some history. The question remains, however, that there could be a fine distance between what fans of Goeniko would want to see and what SNK would be able and willing to execute, and that it would be hard to turn back once that got released out in the world. In the meantime, there is at least one other KOF mobile game out there implementing female versions of characters, the King of Fighters All-Stars. And while Goenitz is yet to be one of those characters, if it ever gets around to it, it could be another way to test the concept in a spin-off by a licensed party before SNK themselves tackle her. Whether there will be a new chapter in the saga of Goeniko, phenomena like these can be interesting to witness, especially when their beginnings are humble. The palette swap Mook from Final Fight got to represent Street Fighter in Street Fighter Cross Tekken before even being playable in a Street Fighter game, and her in-universe ascension in life has been nearly as great, from street thug to entertainment entrepreneur. Relatively few people have read Matt Fury's Boys Club, but practically everyone nowadays is aware of Pepe the Frog, and some even claim it might be a modern manifestation of an ancient Egyptian deity called Kek. The fact that his writer tried to kill him in the comic has done nothing to stop his mimetic spread. Comparatively few people have played Super Mario RPG, but several seem to really want one of its original characters, Geno, in Super Smash Bros. Someone took a power-up and a story element from different Mario games and created a short comic on Twitter that spawned the Bowsette phenomenon, that exploded across the collective imagination to such an extent that Nintendo themselves will never be able to claim Bowsette as their own, despite owning every ingredient involved in her creation. It can be both fascinating to see, yet hard to understand, how come characters with such limited initial exposure get to rise to such heights. Alvin Schwartz wrote Superman comics for over a decade, and like many writers, he acknowledges that characters sometimes develop something of a gravity of their own, the way they behave in a story that directs or inspires their writers. But he goes a step forward. In his blog, he states, Superman created himself, using us as catalysts to reacquaint our modern world with a very old idea, an idea found in the work of the Sufi poets, in the Old and New Testaments, and in dozens of ancient religions, reaching back into the dawn of history, the idea of the eternal now. This idea is expanded on in his book An Unlikely Prophet, where he outright treats Superman like a tulpa fed by the focus put into it by writers, artists, and readers. The concept is also indirectly addressed in the anime series Recreators, where several fictional characters manifest in the real world, and not necessarily the protagonists of their respective works, but the ones with the greatest impact on their audience. The concept and execution are enjoyable, although it's limited by works created by people living in the early 21st century in Japan, where the concept is stretched across geography and time. Would that series have to focus on figures ancient enough to have religions based around them, separating ancient religion from modern fiction through the passage of time alone? Could some of the pop culture of today, should it last centuries or millennia, come to be regarded or converted into religion over time? I in no way intend to demean religion by comparing it I in no way intend to mean religion by comparing it to fiction. In both cases, there can be edifying lessons to learn. There's that saying about when the wise point to the moon, the focus should be on the moon and not the finger pointing at it. And both religion and fiction can serve as different fingers pointing in similar directions. Perhaps there is something archetypal about characters like Goeniko that gain an unlikely traction from humble beginnings. Something in our psyches that, lacking a shape, clings to a fitting form when it finds one, making it easier to latch on to and to share from then on. When we're young, some characters we come across, especially if they were created before we were born, they feel like something eternal and timeless. And as the years go by, we see new ones being established. Something the last century or so has been fertile in, and we come to see them as a passing novelty, or something refreshing and resonant that was just waiting to exist, that we'll cherish and share. These views may change over a lifetime for many individuals regarding many characters, and it may be important to try and understand what is it we really see in them. Even if the issue is purely aesthetic, that too can be valuable on a personal level. I cannot claim to have a final word on what makes Goeniko work, but I still hope, but I still hope it was, but I still hope this was an interesting use of your time. Take care.